Paul Bannon was a mechanic, a man who spoke the language of grease, stripped gears, and tired engines. He wasn't built for galactic politics, and he certainly wasn't built for this. He was just finishing a shift on a temperamental VTOL unit, sweat matting his hair, when the airlock hissed open. He shouldn't have looked. In the harsh fluorescent hum of the maintenance bay, the armor plates hit the floor first, then the undersuit. Paul froze. Zenith of Flameline stood there, skin stripped of steel, terrifyingly vulnerable, terrifyingly lethal. She turned. Her eyes, violet and sharp as cut glass, locked onto his. "You dare watch me, human?" Her voice wasn't a question, it was a sentence. I didn't mean to." "Good," she stepped closer, the distance between them evaporating like water on a hot engine block. "You've just claimed me. In Zoran law, the right of glance is absolute. To see a warrior in the sacred undress without looking away is an act of possession. Intent is irrelevant. Action is everything." Paul had looked. He had lingered. And in the cold, binary logic of Zenith's people, he had just proposed marriage, lifelong bonding, and war. They stood before the elders in the circular pit of judgment. Paul felt small, a fleshy anomaly in a room of hard angles and harder stairs. But the real threat wasn't the elders. It was the man stepping from the shadows, Commander Dravik, a Zoran purist, a mountain of scarred muscle and xenophobic rage. "I challenge the bond," Dravik sneered, looking at Paul like he was a stain on the floor. "The human is weak, unblooded. I invoke the right of strength." The terms were set in stone. 7 days. Paul had 1 week to prepare for a blood challenge against Dravik's champion, or he would die, and Zenith would become Dravik's property. The walk back to Zenith's quarters felt like a funeral procession. "You think this is romantic?" Paul asked, his voice tight. "I think I'm about to get my ribs turned into shrapnel." "If you lose, I am lost," Zenith said, handing him a glass of something that smelled like rocket fuel. "So, we train." The next 7 days were a blur of agony. Zenith didn't teach him to be a Zoran warrior. That was impossible. She taught him to be a desperate human. Don't overpower, evade, trip, cheat. They trained in the bowels of the station, in a forgotten hangar. It was there they met Trix, a 4-armed Zitharan engineer with a grin full of sharp teeth and a hatred for Dravik's pure-blood regime. "He's being poisoned," Trix announced on the 5th day, scanning Paul's trembling hands. "Neurosuppressants in the water. Dravik doesn't leave things to chance." "Sabotage," Zenith hissed, her face dark with fury. "It means he fears you." "Fears me?" Paul laughed, wiping blood from his lip. "I'm a mechanic." "You're an anomaly," Zenith corrected, stepping into his personal space. The air between them suddenly charged with more than just adrenaline. And anomalies change the world. The morning of the duel, the arena smelled of ozone and old blood. The stands were packed. Dravik sat high above, a vulture waiting for the carcass. His champion, Vorsha, was a tank of a creature, wielding a blade longer than Paul's arm. The fight began with a storm of violence. Vorsha was power. Paul was panic and instinct. He ducked, rolled, and scrambled, the massive blade missing him by millimeters. Survive long enough for him to make a mistake. It happened at the 4-minute mark. Vorsha overextended. Paul didn't strike with strength. He struck with leverage, driving his shoulder into the giant's center of gravity, slamming them both into the stone wall. Vorsha staggered, raised his blade, and then stopped. He looked at Paul, chest heaving. "You didn't know the law, did you? You fight with no technique, only desperation. You fight with truth." Vorsha turned to the elders, lowering his weapon. "I withdraw. There is no honor in slaughtering the innocent to feed a commander's ego." Dravik exploded from his seat, screaming treason, but Trix was already moving. The engineer projected a hologram into the center of the arena. Data logs, surveillance footage, chemical readouts. "Dravik didn't just poison the human," Trix's voice boomed. "He rigged the arena oxygen levels. He suppressed genetic data proving human-Zoran compatibility. He has lied to keep the bloodlines pure." The silence that followed was heavier than the violence. Dravik was stripped of rank on the spot, dragged away kicking and screaming about purity. But the real shift happened later, in the quiet dark of Zenith's quarters. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a heavy, undeniable gravity. Zenit unclasped her armor, piece by piece, dropping the warrior to reveal the woman. She sat beside Paul on the edge of the bed. "We fought the world today," she whispered. "We won," Paul said, his hand finding the scars on her back. "Not just the fight." She leaned in, her forehead against his. "We won the right to choose." They came together not as warrior and claim, but as flesh and blood. It was frantic, a collision of survivors needing to prove they were still alive. But history, as it turns out, isn't done with you just because you won the match. Months passed. The station was renamed Unity, but the peace was fragile. Then Zenit collapsed. The medical bay hummed with confusion. Trix ran the scanner 3 times before she turned to Paul, her 4 eyes wide. "She's not sick, Paul. She's pregnant." The shockwave was absolute. Zoran and human DNA were supposed to be incompatible. Dravik's laws said so. Science said so. But the heartbeat on the monitor didn't care about laws. "He'll come for us," Zenit said that night, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Dravik, he's in exile, but he has loyalists. A hybrid child proves everything he stood for was a lie. He can't let this baby exist." She was right. The attack came under the cover of a solar flare. Mercenaries, faceless and heavily armed, breached the outer ring. But they weren't just facing a mechanic and a soldier anymore. They were facing parents. Paul fought with a wrench in one hand and a stolen plasma pistol in the other, defending the medical wing. Zenit was a whirlwind of maternal rage, moving faster than her pregnancy should have allowed. They cornered Dravik in the cargo bay. The disgraced commander looked ragged, desperate. "It is an abomination," he screamed, leveling a weapon at Zenit. "It is the future," Paul said, stepping in front of her. Dravik fired, but he was slow, bitter, and old. Zenit threw her blade. It didn't kill him. She was better than that now. But it pinned his shoulder to the bulkhead, ending the war with a clang of steel against steel. 1 year later, the observation deck of Unity Station looked out over the nebula. Paul sat on a bench watching a toddler wobble across the synthetic grass. The boy had Paul's jawline but Zenit's emerald-tinted skin. Kale, the first of his kind. Zenit stood by the window, watching the stars. The station was bustling, humans and Zorans working side by side, the barriers of biology and culture slowly eroding under the weight of a single, undeniable truth toddling around the garden. "You still wonder?" Paul asked, coming up behind her. "About the hallway. If I had looked away." Zenit leaned back into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I wonder many things. But I do not wonder about us." She watched their son laugh as he chased a butterfly drone. "We broke the world, Paul," she whispered, a smile touching her lips. "No," he replied, kissing the side of her head. "We just fixed the engine.